So CPE is available for this session. You do have to answer the polling questions as they come up in order to receive the CPE, but we have your information. So if you're interested in CPE, please make sure that you email Olga, and we'll make sure that you get CPE credit for attending this session. Again, as I mentioned, we want this to be educational, sort of a back to the basics. What is the Medicare cost report? What goes into the Medicare cost report? And what does the Medicare cost report tell us? And as state veterans homes, you folks have a little bit of a unique set of circumstances when it comes to preparing the Medicare cost report, because the Medicare cost report is required to be presented or to CMS or compiled under what's called the accrual basis of accounting. So accrual basis of accounting is different from what you do as part of your budgetary accounting. So you record your expenditures for the most part as they're made. As the cash is made, you record your expenditures. You have a budget that you work with. The cost report requires you to accrue expenses or revenue that a time frame, so from 1/1 to 12/31 or from 7/1 to 6/30, they're requiring that you accrue or record all expenditures related to that time period, whether you have or haven't actually expended the cash. So that requires a little bit of adjustment, and that takes a little bit of work to get through. And so that's a different set or unique circumstance for you folks. Okay. Can everyone see the presentation okay? Can you see it, Olga? Okay, great. So I just want to take a moment to introduce myself and to introduce Olga. So my name is Lisa Trundy-Whitten. For those of you who haven't met me, I am a principal at BerryDunn. I am in charge of the overall preparation of your Medicare cost reports. I have been working in senior living now for about 18 years. I serve senior living and state veterans homes clients across the United States. And I focus primarily on state veterans homes and skilled nursing facilities. So that's where the bulk of my work lies each year. My colleague, Olga Gross-Balzano, I'm gonna let her introduce herself and tell a little bit about herself.
So I am Olga, and I work with most of you know me. I prepare a lot of cost reports, and I really quite enjoy that process because I am a nursing home administrator, not just a CPA, and I really miss working with nursing facilities and senior living environment. So this is a great opportunity for me to be in touch with the industry and learn from you and provide some support when you need it. I'm excited we are doing this presentation today, and I'm hoping you will learn something that is helping you in the process of preparing for Medicare cost reports that we are about to start with all of you.
Thank you, Olga. So the objectives for our session today is number one, to gain a working understanding of the SNF Medicare cost report. So we're going to talk to you about how the Medicare cost report flows, from beginning to end and what information goes in there. But we're also trying to help you with what you do and how your work impacts the Medicare cost report and how you can perhaps be more efficient or effective in gathering the information you need in order to prepare the Medicare cost report. CMS does some periodic studies every once in a while where they look at how much time it takes to prepare the skilled nursing facility Medicare cost report. And on average, they estimate that it takes about 200 hours to prepare a Medicare cost report for a skilled nursing facility. And that goes from the processes that you folks have, from gathering all the data to preparing the time studies, working on your censuses, recording your expenses, pieces all the way through pulling it together into that final form. So it's quite an undertaking to get the Medicare cost report done. And it's certainly one of those things you don't want to spend extra time on. So anything you can do to be more efficient and effective in preparing the cost report will be helpful. We'll also talk about the Medicare SNF, skilled nursing facility reimbursement principles and things to be thinking about, what you can be reimbursed for on the Medicare cost report. And then talk about the preparation process for the Medicare cost report. So it's time for us to have a polling question. Can you all see the polling question?
Yep, I can see it.
Perfect. So it looks like with about 93% of you voting, which is great, it looks like it's sort of evenly split between gathering the data that's required and answering the questions that are required for the cost report, and then really from the all above. So gathering the data and or supervising and coordinating the data, and then reviewing the cost report. So it's a pretty even split there with our group. All right, so the agenda of what we're going to go through, we're going to do a brief overview of the Medicare cost report and its uses. We'll talk about the matching principle, how revenues and expenses should be matched. We'll look at, talk about the PSNR, the provider statistical report, and the communications that you get from your Medicare contractor and what you should be looking for. Statistical items that are required for the cost report, how central office costs are recorded on the cost report and allocated, the different cost report filing methodologies or methods for doing it, and then the reimbursable items, what is truly reimbursable on a cost report, and some best practices. And throughout this whole process, we'd really like you to ask questions as we go.
All right. So let's take a look at the Medicare cost report. And first we will start with why are we even spending those 200 hours that Lisa mentioned on preparing of those cost reports. First of all, of course, there's regulatory compliance element. It is required that facilities file Medicare cost reports if they participate with Medicare and Medicaid. Another good reason is that there is some limited opportunities to collect additional funds from Medicare because there's some reimbursement adjustment. It is related to bad debts, and for some facilities, it is quite a significant chunk of cash. There's also opportunities to collect reimbursement related to utilization review, which is your medical director involvement in managing your Medicare population. And then there's a portion related to vaccine cost, not administration, but cost of medication, the actual vaccine. Another good reason, since we are already required to have regulatory compliance element and we are preparing cost report anyway, there's some benefit in taking a deeper look at that and using that tool that is available to us for other tasks. So we look at process improvement, budgeting, goal settings. We have an incredible database of benchmarks because we do look at, or we can see all Medicare cost reports filed nationwide. And we actually shared some benchmarks with you before this meeting, and some of those benchmarks were based on Medicare cost reports. It gives you great opportunity to benchmark yourself against your peers, see how people do in certain areas, and do you have opportunity to improve your performance, get better reimbursement, better control cost, or maybe some other areas of operations. And then the last point here is that certain states, such as North Carolina, also use same Medicare cost report form as their Medicaid filing. So they only have to do kind of this one process. There are some additional schedules, but that same form can be used both for Medicare and Medicaid cost report filing. Unfortunately, Washington and Kansas have to go through a different process with the state. But some principles that we talk about Medicare, they do translate into Medicaid cost report preparation environment. So some principles are very similar. And actually both Kansas and Washington state say that in absence of specific Medicaid reimbursement rule, they default to Medicare reimbursement principles in terms of what may be allowable and what's not allowable. And now, Lisa, can you advance us to next slide?
Sure.
Thank you. So there's a lot of buzzwords related to Medicare cost report. And I know there's very different level of knowledge in this group, but I wanted to make sure that we have this reminder to everybody of what those Medicare cost report buzzwords, what they actually mean in the environment of cost report. So we look at expenses, and expense and cost are not same thing. So expense is what you pay to purchase an item or service. And cost is actually what it's really costing you to provide service. And it may be bigger, at least I think we see your Outlook calendar.
Yeah, sorry.
So costs could be higher than expense because let's say for director of nurses, it's not just wages of director of nurses and their benefits, but they may be occupying an office that you have depreciation on, you provide utilities. So the cost of having director of nurses in this case is exceeding expense. And what Medicare cost report does is that it collects information about expenses in different areas and then calculates cost of you providing service or cost of services you provide or cost of support services. Then we look at revenues, and revenues is basically your income. It's what you receive for funding to your facility. And revenue is not just limited to what you receive from Medicare. Your revenues are all your income coming to facility. It may be from sale of meals. It may be from interest. It may be from if you have cable charges for your residents. Some of you may have state or federal grants. So all those things are your revenues. So any income in cash. We also know that Medicare and Medicaid and commercial insurance do not pay you what you charge. There's either MDS completed resident assessment to calculate complexity of care for a resident, or you have maybe pre-negotiated rates with insurance companies. In either situation, you have your standard room and board rate, maybe $200 per day. but what you actually get paid for particular resident care may be more than that. It may be $350 that Medicare pays you, or it may be lower than that if you have commercial insurance contracts. So any difference between your standard rate that you would normally charge and what you actually get reimbursed by an insurance carrier is your contractual allowance. Lisa already talked about accrual method of accounting, so we just have to, so Medicare cost report is prepared based on accrual basis. So all of you see those adjustments where we remove some expenses that maybe were accrued and not paid for the beginning of the year. And then in the end of the year, we are not just looking at expenses you had in June, but you may be getting some invoices in July for services that were provided to your facilities in May or June. So there are some accruals for expenses that will be coming at a later time. And accrual method of accounting basically balances that that all revenues and all expenses are recorded and reported in the period when those services were provided. SNF consolidated billing is a big part of Medicare cost report. When patients are in your buildings on the skilled nursing facility Medicare stay, all the services, or most of the services, I should say, that you provide to them are covered by one rate, not standard, based on complexity of the patient. So all ancillaries such as medications, therapies, medical supplies, x-rays, labs, everything is included in that consolidated billing. And I know we had very hard time with some of you trying to figure out those Medicare, those therapy charges, because you don't really report them separately, but they are a part of reporting for Medicare cost report. So Medicare does want to know what charges you had prior to contractuals for your therapies and medications and all other ancillary services. We will also talk about cost centers today, and the cost center is pretty much a department or a level of care for purposes of Medicare cost report. So skilled nursing unit is a cost center. Then some of you have assisted living, domiciliary units, DOMs, they are non-reimbursable cost centers because Medicare does not pay for those services provided there. But also departments such as dietary, maintenance, housekeeping, they are all cost centers. So they are all separate cost centers, and we will talk about allocations and some statistics for allocations to those cost centers. Matching principle of revenue and expenses is pretty much standard requirement for Medicare cost report. So Medicare is expecting that when we report expenses, that revenues for that same period is also there, but not only the period. We also look at the level of cost center. So for example, your dietary department not only may have costs, but they may also have revenues if you are selling meals to your employees or some guest visitors, or you have some catering events. So any revenue received from dietary events or services have to be applied to reduce the cost of that service provided. So, and that is matching principle.
Olga, I'm going to give you a minute to take a breath, and I'm just going to talk about matching principle just for a moment.
Absolutely.
I think the matching principle is probably the most difficult concept, or the thing that takes the most time to work through on a Medicare cost report, because we spend a lot of time working through and looking at your expenses to make sure that certain types of expenses are recorded within the same lines so that we can get to that matching principle. So if you have an expenditure for a contracted service, and part of it's included in one cost center, but part of it's included in another cost center, and we're not getting them on the same line, then we're not actually able to properly match our costs and our revenue. So that takes a lot of time to work through. Once you sort of get that matching principle, it becomes easier when you're thinking about where you record your expenses. But it's really important to make sure that we're getting things in the same place so that we can match them up and really use the cost report as a tool, because it gives us great information about how our revenues and expenses work together, how they match. And it's a good tool organizationally to see what you're spending for certain amounts of revenue.
Okay. So, and then we have a lot of you heard PSNR, and that is provide the statistical and reimbursement report. And facilities that bill Medicare can request that report, and actually Medicare administrative contractors now require that you use provide the statistical and reimbursement report in preparing your Medicare cost report. And we will have some more information about it later in the presentation. But basically, it shows all the charges you submitted to Medicare and all the payments that Medicare made to your facility. Then we should really mention utilization review. You probably already heard me saying that it is one of reimbursable items on Medicare cost report, and utilization review is your medical directors or physician assistant or PA, nurse practitioner that work with your medical director. It is their non-chargeable time that goes into managing your patients, looking at admissions, discharges, how to get somebody rehabilitation that they need, and what they will need after your skilled nursing facility stay. So that time spent by medical director is reimbursed by Medicare to help you manage that cost, because they cannot really bill it to Medicare. So it's a non-chargeable cost. Bad debts are also reimbursable, and we should mention here there was a lot of confusion in the past year about what goes into Medicare bad debts. And bad debts that we can report for reimbursement are only those related to Medicare A or Medicare B, uncollected deductibles or co-pays. You cannot include any costs, any uncollected co-pays related to Medicare Advantage or any other insurance. Some states have prospective payments for bad debts, and we have to report any payments you receive during the year for bad debt. And that does not apply to all states, but prospective payments to providers are part of the reimbursement for Medicare. Medicare Administrative Contractor, MAC, is the agency that manages your claims and reimbursement report and issues payments. And that is the organization that you send your Medicare bills to. You may not directly send it to the contractor. You may be using software like a clearinghouse that transmits your claims. And frequently, people sometimes don't even know who their MAC is. But if you receive any communications from National Government Services or Meridian or Palmetto GBA, we do ask you that you keep all those letters and you share them with us when we work in cost report preparation. They are important for us to know what's happening, because those normally related either to payments you receive or reports that you have to file. And finally, let's talk about per patient day. That is a standard of presenting costs and revenues in order to compare them between different facilities or cost centers. So per patient day statistic is any cost or expense or revenue that is divided by number of patient days that service or revenue applied to, just so we could compare operational benchmarks of how well you're doing in some area. Next slide, please, Lisa. So there's a quick overview of Medicare cost report flow. We start with some very general identifying information, simple information about reimbursement and settlement areas, such as facility name, provider number, and dates that the report is applicable to. Then we have statistical section that has to do with facility, patient, and employee related statistics, where we present wages, hours, benefits, and patient statistics such as number of patient days, length of stay, and things like that. I think one of the struggles we had is in matching wages and hours for employees. We are required to show hours and wages by department. And then what cost report does, it calculates average hourly rate based on that information. So when we get $5 an hour, we know something is wrong because that is not, that is below the federal wage minimum. Or if we get $200 an hour, we may also be asking you to take a look at that. And we understand that it is not very easy sometimes because you have payroll records that need to be basically translated and presented in a manner that your general ledger works. Sometimes it's not easy, but again, it is required, and we need to do the best to present that information accurately. Schedule A reports expenses per trial balance. And we share groupings or crosswalk with you. And we normally ask you to review our groupings because using that matching principle, if we do not group the accounts correctly, then we don't have right allocation of hours, we don't have right statistics. So there's some fine tuning that we may need to do with you in order to get all the accounts and the correct cost centers or cost report lines.
And Olga, I'll add here that for the audits that we've gone through for both Medicaid and Medicare for your facilities, that's really the most common question we get on audit. Two things. One is about wages. Why have wages changed? You know, that wage rate changed, and why have expenses gone up or down? So generally the auditors, they start with sort of an analytical program where they look at your groupings in worksheet A, whether it's Medicare, Medicaid, and they look to see for variances. And that's one of the first things that they'll ask for is why were there changes? So that's one of the things that we really try to make sure as we're reviewing and preparing the cost report, that we're being consistent year to year as to how things are grouped on your Medicare cost report, but also making sure that we really truly have things lined up in their proper places, you know, on the proper cost centers, so we get good information. Because really your cost report, the information you get from your cost report is only as good as the information that goes into your cost report.
And in those situations where your account is too broad, or maybe you made a mistake in posting something to wrong account, and then you were reviewing it with us and we got that there's a schedule of expense reclassifications where we can move some costs from one line to another in order to make it more accurate. There is a schedule for reporting of fixed assets, and basically what is required is that we report historical balances for cost of fixed assets on your books, but then we also report additions, any disposals, and also fully depreciated asset costs. Following Schedule A8 provides opportunity for us to do adjustment of expenses, and basically it is a true up of reported expenses. And that is also not only to remove expense, but sometimes add expense. And for your group, we are actually adding an expense related to central office. So that schedule is to help us figure out costs that should be presented for that provider, but maybe you have a couple different entities, you have home office, or you have a management company, or some other situation where some costs are not on your trial balance. So we can add those expenses, or we can remove something that expenses that are not allowable, maybe related to marketing, or something like legal expenses that should not be allowable for Medicare purposes.
And this is also where we offset any income that you have. For instance, if, like Olga mentioned before, if you have dietary income, where you have guest meals or vending machines or things like that, that gets offset on this schedule as well.
Right. Then we also do related party adjustments. If you have a management company, there's a lot of transactions between related entities, maybe, or like state of Washington, you guys have different facilities that share some services. So there's an opportunity for us to say, this is the cost that is reported on cost report, but is it accurate? Do we need to make an adjustment to that and align it with Medicare reimbursement principles? We also have to report names of related parties and services that they provide. And then we got into B series of cost report schedules, and that is that section is looking to calculate allowable costs and have allocation statistics that are either approved by CMS as standard ones, or you requested certain allocation statistics specific to your facility. What is happening with Schedule B is you tell us what statistics we should use to allocate costs of services provided, such as dietary laundry. Maybe it's laundry pounds. For dietary, it's normally number of meals served. For all building related costs, we normally use square footage. So all those things we ask you, and we report those allocation statistics on Schedule B. And then cost report calculates true cost of services provided beyond expenses that are on your trial balance. Section C is ancillary revenues, and we report all ancillary service charges, not just Medicare, but all insurance, all types of patients. And then on Schedule D, we have to report Medicare specific program ancillary charges. And normally we provide a statistical and reimbursement report for that. And if you don't have it, then we work with you to try to better understand how we can calculate those ancillary revenue. And then Schedule D calculates Medicare A ancillary program cost and total cost of Medicare program, capital costs, routine cost, ancillaries. Section 8 summarizes reimbursement. So we report all the revenues that you are supposed to be getting from Medicare, and we report what you have actually received in payments from Medicare. And cost report calculates whether you need to pay back to Medicare. Normally it's only limited to overpayment of bad debts or vaccine cost. And then also there are situations where Medicare may have underpaid you, so you would be getting money back from Medicare. And then last section of Medicare cost report is financial statements. And normally we just really report it from information you provide to us.
Great. I think it's time for us to take another poll, Olga.
We see some answers coming in. We'll give it another moment. So, and it looks like most of you have some limited experience with Medicare cost report. Very few of you are very confident, and small group has never seen one. So we will try to help you just a little bit with how to navigate the cost report. So basically, Medicare cost report is a giant Excel spreadsheet, if you can visualize it that way. There are worksheets at the top of each section. It will tell you which worksheet you have. So it's like tabs in Excel spreadsheet. And those worksheets have a very specific designation, and we just walked through them. So there's section for report and expenses, then section for doing a true up of your expenses and adjustments, statistical sections, and then calculation of reimbursement. So specific worksheets. And then most of the cost report is organized in columns and lines. Lines are called cost centers. And on this example here, you can see, so they are standard between all skilled nursing facility cost reports, with the exception of very specific cost centers, and they would be probably your non-reimbursable cost centers. We have opportunity to add additional lines, but other than that, whether you are in Kansas or North Carolina or Washington, line cost center 5 or 500 is always going to be your plant, your maintenance services, and 8 or 800 is always dietary department. And that makes it really great for us in order to compare facilities across the states. So that information comes in consistently, and it's standard look of all cost reports. And then in columns, they're called columns, there will be a numbering. So when we ask you to take a look at something, when you're reviewing a cost report, we would tell you, please take a look at worksheet A, line 8, which is dietary, and column 3, which is total cost. So it's really like we can provide you coordinates where you can find information we are looking for you to review. But again, everything is in worksheets like Excel tabs, and then columns and lines are quite consistent between providers. We also have sections of cost centers. So the top section, lines 1 through 15, they are general service cost centers, and they are support services provided to support your skilled nursing facility. So that includes capital related expenses, employee benefits, administration, housekeeping, laundry, your central supply, pharmacy, activity, social services. And what happens with these cost centers, they are not revenue producing. So they do not provide service to patients or residents, with exception maybe dietary services or laundry services. But normally it is of the skilled nursing facility or your assisted living that provides service to patient. So what happens with the cost report is this general service cost centers, their costs get allocated down to the revenue producing cost centers, such as skilled nursing or ancillaries or your assisted living. The next section of the cost centers is inpatient routine services. And normally that is just line 30, your skilled nursing facility. Some facilities may have residential care facility like medical model. I don't believe any one of you have those services. And then the section for ancillary cost centers, labs, radiology, IV medications, therapies, all those ancillaries you provide. And then in the end, there are non-reimbursable cost centers. The costs for them are calculated, so you report expenses and cost is calculated, but that cost is non-reimbursable for purposes of Medicare program participation. All right, next slide, please, Lisa.
I think the next slide moves on to me, right?
Yes, you're going to talk about reimbursement principles.
Before we do, though, I'm going to go back to this worksheet right here for those of you who are feeling somewhat like they've not seen a Medicare cost report before, and use the analogy of a tax return, because I think most of us have done tax returns. And the Medicare cost report is very much akin to a cost report, to a tax return. In your Schedule S's, your tax return, you're putting in sort of your general information, your information about your facility. And then when you get to Schedule A, it's kind of like putting your expenses into your tax return, what you have, what you made for wages, what your expenses are. Then when you go on to to Section B, you're putting those through the B worksheets. You're moving those to all the right back in the A's. Then through A6 and A8 and A81, you're basically taking all your deductions and all your credits that you can in sort of a tax return. And then you're allocating, once you get through the Schedule A, you come to all the costs that you can claim on your cost report. And then you allocate them down to B. And when you get to the very end to Section E, you have your reimbursement or your settlement. So what you owe or what you're going to receive. So it's very much similar in concept to the tax return that we file every year. Okay. So some principles of reimbursement, or things, the underlying principles that drive what gets put onto a Medicare cost report. So the costs on a cost report must be ordinary. They must be, or things that a prudent buyer would have, or prudent buyer would consider to be reasonable. They must be necessary for the costs of the resident care. As Olga mentioned, an example would be legal. So we often incur legal expense in our facilities related to things like if we're trying to collect money from residents, or we have something that needs to be reviewed, needs a legal opinion. Those are services that may be necessary for the facility, but they're not related to the residents. So therefore they're not allowed. It's something we would take off on our A8. Another example is some advertising and promotional. While we need them, to promote our facility and make sure we're keeping our admissions there, it's not really related to the care of the resident, so Medicare does not allow that cost. The overall concept of Medicare reimbursement for skilled nursing facilities is that you're getting paid on a prospective basis. So you're getting paid for the care of your residents on a prospective basis based on PDPM. So based on each resident and the MDS that you submit, they get put into a PDPM category. And that's the level of care that they need and that you're providing, and you're paid a rate based on that. And it's not settled up. You don't get any sort of settlement on it. It is what it is based on the PDPM category. So for Medicare, your cost report is really more of a informational or statistical tool for you and for CMS, so that they can look at, CMS uses our Medicare cost reports to look at the cost report, to set rates and to determine costs and to determine what services may or may not be costing the Medicare program more. So for you, your settlement on a cost report is really limited to three things. The first is vaccines. So you do get a settlement for the cost of vaccines. You can receive a settlement for that if they're not reimbursed by others. You also, and this is the biggest one for most skilled nursing facilities, can receive a reimbursement for Medicare bad debts. So those are, in order to qualify as a Medicare bad debt, it must be a covered service, and the bad debt should be generated from a deductible or co-insurance related to that. You have to establish that you've made reasonable collection efforts. So you have to show that you've billed it timely, that you have attempted to collect the payment, and in the end that you've truly written off, that the charge has been taken off your books. And you have to make sure that you're treating Medicare bad debts in the same way that you're treating bad debts from all other payers. So just because you know you're going to get reimbursed for a Medicare bad debt, you can't do a different process than you would for your other payers. So you have to take it all the way through the process for billing and follow-up and collection. You have to show that the debt is uncollectible. So that truly means that you wrote the bad debt off your accounts receivable ledger, and then that it's been recorded in a bad debt account. So instead of just putting it into like a contractual account, you need to make sure that it's been recorded truly in a bad debt expense account. Medicare will reimburse you 65% of your bad debts. It used to be a little less than that because of sequestration. Because sequestration they would take 2% off. But right now, while sequestration is suspended, you get 65% of those. Some facilities do get what's called an interim payment on bad debt. So based on the cost report that they filed in the prior year, they may get a weekly payment for their bad debts. It's important, if you do receive a bad debt payment, that you provide us with the letter so that we can make sure that it gets onto your cost report, because that's offset against your cost report expenses. And Medicare does have a prescribed listing. So they have a format that has to be followed, along with support that needs to go into that format in order for those bad debts to be qualified, to be recorded on your cost report. For most Medicare providers, this is where they sort of can make a little bit of money, is by making sure they're very careful about tracking those bad debts, about making sure they get all the information that they need and onto the correct form so they can claim them as part of their cost report. And then, as Olga mentioned earlier, you can also get, and this is one that's a little less, people are a little less aware of, is you can get reimbursed for Medicare utilization costs. So the cost of utilization review, if you have a provider as part of that meeting, you can get reimbursed for the Medicare portion of that cost. So something to be thinking about as you're going through this year and you're looking back at your Medicare utilization review meetings, what information do you have to support that time so that you can get reimbursed for that time? Cost center. So we talked a little bit about another principle here with the Medicare cost report is they take your costs and they basically allocate the cost. So up in this top section in those general service cost centers, those are the cost centers that serve everybody. Those in the facility, they do all the supporting work of the skilled nursing facility and the DOM facility. Those costs are allocated down to your service centers and your non-reimbursable centers, those that don't provide or do provide services. And those costs are allocated or stepped down based on statistics. For many of our, for many people, the statistic is for capital related costs, CMS requires the most approved statistic is square feet. There are others that you can use, such as depreciation, but most people use, or facilities use, square feet. Laundry and linen is another one where we look at allocation. An acceptable allocation for laundry and linen is patient days and or pounds of laundry. For dietary, the most common allocation is your meals served. And then others, it varies. There are different statistics, but the important part is that you have to track that statistic. So if you're using something other than your patient days as a statistic, so if you're using, say, if you decide that you want to use pounds of laundry instead of patient days, you need to, one, make sure that you get prior CMS approval to change your statistics, and two, that you track those statistics throughout the year. One of those is, so your nursing hours, your direct care nursing hours is the approved or generally accepted statistic for nursing administration. You want to make sure that you have a good methodology for tracking those nursing hours in your payroll system so that you can easily pull them and use them to allocate that statistic.
Can I add something?
Yes, go.
Can we go back to the previous one to step down?
Oh, yes, sure.
So for those of you who have limited experience with the cost report, at the top of each column on Schedule B, it will tell you what your facility is using as approved statistical measure. And you cannot change it without requesting authorization from CMS or from your Medicare administrative contractor. If you decide that you need to change your approach and your statistics, you have to notify them within first 3 months of your new business, your new fiscal year. So you cannot look at it in the end of the year and say, oh, we would be better off using some other allocation, so we are going to change it. So normally you can change it in first 3 months of your new fiscal year. You have to write a letter to CMS asking for them to approve that allocation statistic use. And again, if you have limited experience, you can always find what statistics are used looking at Schedule B, a worksheet B or B1, and at the top of each column, it will tell you what kind of allocation statistic you're using to allocate cost in that category. Thank you, Lisa. All right, so this is some pictures, some snippets from Provide the Statistical and Reimbursement Report. I mentioned that this is really required tool now that we have to use in preparation of cost report, because it really summarizes all your patient days, all your ancillary charges, and all your payments that facility received from Medicare. So when we have this report, we can prepare report more accurately. Unfortunately, quite a number of facilities have experienced turnover, and person who has access to requesting those PSNR reports may not be in your facility any longer. So in preparation for a Medicare cost report, we ask that you check who in your facility has access to CMS reports, and if that person is no longer on your staff, that you proactively request access and that you maintain your password and you can actually get that information when you need it. If you need any assistance getting your PSNR, you're doing it only once a year and you forgot how to do it, let us know. I'm very happy to send you instructions on getting that report, or do a Zoom or Teams meeting and help you get your approvals. And Melissa, that reminds me that we need to schedule our appointment. You just really want to make sure that you don't leave it for the time when it's due, because it will take a few weeks to get all the required authorizations in place. The actual PSNR report you can request and it will be ready normally within 5 minutes. Everything is done online this time, so pretty easy. All right, next slide, please. So Medicare cost report filing options. There are a few options this year that CMS and MACs provide to us on how to file your cost reports. You can still use paper in combination with CD or thumb drive to send cost report to Medicare. The preferred way, though, is to use Medicare e-file or IDM self-service. It's an electronic submission. And on this slide, you can see a snippet of submission through a Medicare e-file. And what's really great about this tool, you do not need to rely on mail options, which at this time may be a little tricky with the mail deliveries, not always being timely, but you can upload all your files. The system that just went through an upgrade this year, it will notify you if you're missing any supporting documents, because you have to upload support for your bad debts, your trial balance crosswalk, and all those supporting documents needed for filing. So you can immediately see status, whether it's been accepted or rejected. And if you need to modify something, you can always go to the website and you can do modifications, like resubmit something or provide additional information right there. It is time-stamped at the time when you submitted it, and there's a due date. So due date is 5 months after fiscal year end, November 30th. And the filing is required by midnight Eastern time. Sorry, Washington, it's midnight our time. So it provides just a little more time if that last moment, if something is happening, something delayed you. So there's a little more time to file. Now let's talk about what happens if you do not file your cost report on time. You have about 10 days of grace period, and some of the facilities did not get 10 days this year. From some MACs, like National Government Services was especially strict on that. They didn't even wait 10 days. They issued a notice of suspension of payments, like at the end of day 9. And what happens is, it's immediate that they turn your payments off. And then in order to resume your Medicare payments due to compliance with Medicare cost report submission, they have up to 30 days to process information and look at your submission and then turn that switch back on. So if you did not if you did not file timely, you may be looking at suspension of payment for up to a month and a half. And it's just the frustration that everybody wants to avoid. So our suggestion to everybody is let's file electronically. I can help you with that filing. We can file for you on your behalf. We do have to have your authorization. We cannot just file for you. You have to approve cost report, and you need to own responsibility, accountability for that filing, but we can help you technically submit that cost report.
This is really one of those things that helps to reduce those 200 hours by doing the process this way, because it really can be cumbersome to deal with trying to save everything on a thumb drive, and is it encrypted, and the bad debt has to go separately if it's not encrypted. And so if you're doing it through thumb drive, so if we haven't set up, if you're not set up, if we haven't set up, I would highly recommend for this season that we start working on that so that you can get your cost reports filed electronically. I think we're up for the last polling question.
And it should be on your screens now. Oh, that's great. So most of you are not sure, but a significant portion, a significant group of you do know what bad debts are, and it looks like you, at least some people in facilities know what's happening with bad debts. And that is great, because it's really excellent opportunity to recoup some of the funds that otherwise would be lost. All right, we will end this poll now.
Okay, so I'm going to wrap us up with some cost report best practices, some things that you can do now and approaching the 6/30 year end in order to make sure that this process goes smoothly, that you're able to be efficient and save yourself some time. So first thing is gather your information year round. It's interesting, you know, as auditors and the people who compare your cost reports, we see your operations in a very segmented way. We look at things that happen from from 7/1 of the fiscal year through 6/30 of the fiscal year. But we realize, and so it's very segmented for us, but for you folks, it's not, because your operations don't stop and start again at the beginning of the fiscal year. So sometimes things can happen throughout the year and you just forget them. So if you have a share file, a shared Medicare cost report folder, someplace where you can put things like, we changed our bed size, or there's been a renovation of the therapy space, and now therapy has more square footage than it did in this year. So, you know, if you did a time study on how long laundry is doing their time, how much time laundry is taking between skilled and the domiciliary facilities. If you have a place where you can share those and just store them through the year, it would help you to be able to sort of pull that information and organize that information quicker and easier at year end. So keeping it all together. Make sure that you maintain and update your passwords in the IDM, in your PSNR portal, any passwords that have a regular update. You know, keep a tickler maybe in that shared cost report folder to say, okay, we're gonna, you know, on this day, everybody needs to update their password, or anyone who has a password. If you do have changes that change allocations, such as square footage, or you change your number of licensed beds, or you have a major renovation project going on throughout the year, that's something that it's helpful to communicate to us during the year. And that way, if we know about it, we can help you to be thinking about the things that you need in order to prepare your cost reports, because when things like that happen, something different might be required. So it's easier to sort of be proactive about it and get it up front than trying to collect it all as we're working through the cost reports. I think most of you who have seen your Medicare cost report, so looking at that, be worksheet B series, the B-1, and the statistics that are being used to allocate the cost down to the cost centers, and make sure those are up to date, that they have the most current square footage. Also, do they make sense? Is that the best allocation? Sometimes allocations just, you know, there's a year when you couldn't do a cost study, so you just decide, I mean, sorry, a time study, or you didn't have pounds of laundry, so for that you just decided to use, you know, days, and maybe days isn't the best statistic, but it sort of defaulted there. So looking at those cost allocations, you can't make changes for the 2021 cost report, but if there's something that we want to change, we'll want to do it in the first 3 months of the fiscal year 2022 in order to get it effective for the 2022 cost reports. We mentioned bad debts, that's a reimbursement opportunity, making sure that you're keeping all the required documentation for the bad debts, you know, remittances that show that the bad debts were denied, your collection efforts, everything that you need in order to make sure that you're able to be reimbursed for those bad debts. Talk to your utilization review teams. Determine what the medical director's functions are as part of the clinical team. Are they part of the utilization review team? Make sure that you're keeping minutes when they're involved, so that you have you know, minutes of the meetings, and also time, so you have the information you need in order to be able to claim those costs. And lastly, when something comes from your administrative contractor, generally it's that they've given you a tentative settlement of your cost report. So they've looked at your cost report, said you've filed all the things that you need to file, you're good to go for now. Or there's a notice of program reimbursement. And what that notice of program reimbursement says is, okay, you filed your cost report, we've reviewed your cost report, or done a desk audit of your cost report, we agree with it or we disagree with it, and this is our final notice saying this is what your settlement is. When you get that notice of program reimbursement, if you disagree with what Medicare is saying, you only have a short period, 60 days, to appeal that decision. So when you see those notice of program reimbursements come through, it's important that you act on them quickly and understand them. The other thing you might get from your MAC would be a letter saying that they're going to pay you interim payments for your bad debts. So your bad debts are considered significant enough that they're going to be paying you throughout the year for those bad debts. So making sure that you hold on to those letters so you know what needs to go onto your cost report. And the other thing they often send you is the information about when your cost report is due and where it's sent. I have never seen an organization change their address as often as a Medicare administrative contractor. So you may have sent it someplace last year if you're sending it in, and it could be someplace very different this year. So they change their addresses quite frequently. So it's important that we catch that and make sure that we're getting it to the correct place so that it's received and filed timely, so that you don't have a delay in any payment.
Or even better, we can get your letters and then we can get to file electronically, and then it doesn't matter where that MAC is, it goes to the CMS directly.
So that's the end of the information that we have to present. And so we'd like to open it up for any questions that you might have.
And I see that everybody is muted. So if you want to ask a question, please unmute yourself and ask.
Yeah, we dropped a couple of questions in the chat there for you.
Okay.
I'm going to stop sharing the presentation just so it's just a little bit easier.
So first question is, why did Medicare switch to requiring PSNR for the cost report when they have not in the past? That is a good question, and that is to make sure probably the easy answer is because they want to spend as little time reviewing cost report as they can, and the more accurate cost report filing is, the less time it requires them to file. But also frequently providers do not bill do not bill Medicare the way that records look on provider side, and that has to do with consolidated billing, where you bill all-inclusive rate, but then your costs are different, and you have different charges to support those costs. So it's one is simplification for MAC in reviewing your cost report, but B, and probably even more important, is that you're looking at what you charged Medicare and that those costs, that those are correct, and that you really can support those charges and you know what you received in reimbursement.
Luke, I can answer the second one. The question is about e-file. So e-file is not all that new. It's been around for a little more than 5 years maybe, but they're starting to really push the filing towards the e-file. They really want to see providers file that way, just because it's more efficient. It's more efficient for you and it's more efficient for them, and it provides them a place to sort of store the information and pull it down. So it is kind of new, but it is kind of new as far as their emphasis, but not as far as the system goes.
Yeah, we had traditionally filed snail mail, but in Kansas, we were able to do our Medicaid cost report e-file. It was super easy and quick, same day. So I definitely think we'll be doing the e-file for Medicare this time around.
Yep, it is. They've made it a pretty easy process now. You know, it's not cumbersome, so it's definitely worth doing. Give a minute in case we have any other questions. All right, well, if not, thank you all for joining us. We have recorded the presentation. We will send you this presentation along with the recording of the presentation that you can share with others within your organization. And we'll also be reaching out to you as we get ready. Once you guys get past your budget season and past year end, we'll be reaching out to talk through the schedule requests, any new things that may appear on the schedule requests, and any questions about how we sort of gathered the information last year. And hope you all have a wonderful Memorial Day weekend.
Thank you.
Welcome.
And thank you for doing this. It's nice to have.
Absolutely. Is there any plan? This is super helpful. So I want to echo what Melissa was saying. Is there any plan to have something similar to this as well for the Medicaid section or reports in the future?
Yeah, Luke, and that one will be state specific, just because, I mean, while Medicaid principles are pretty similar, it'll be state specific, but we will do that for Medicaid. Once we get through the Medicare cost reports, we'll plan on doing some stuff for Medicaid as well.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much. Really appreciate it.
Yes.
Welcome.
Well, hopefully everybody avoids hurricane weather and does not lose power. So best of luck with weather. And it was very nice to see you guys today.
Thank you
for
all.
joining us.
Have a good afternoon.
You too.